Welcome to our 6th annual Free the Seeds Fair. This is our first time going virtual, and we are excited to share our workshop with you today in the comfort of your own home. We are really looking forward to being in person together again next year. Free the Seeds is a community-based project of farmhands and rooted in building a sustainable and resilient future through real seeds, real food, and real skills. While this is a free event, it takes time and money to make it happen. If you would like to support these efforts, please go to freetheseedsmontana.com to donate. My name is Whitney Pratt, and I'm the education coordinator with Farmhands Nourish, and I also help manage a school garden orchard, so I am thrilled to be in this particular workshop. Our presenters today are Lise Rousseau and Dan Getman. Lise owns Fat Robin Orchard and Farm. The family-run orchard overlooking Flathead Lake has existed since the 1930s. They grow organic sweet and tart cherries. They also grow apples, including heirloom wealthy apples that were planted in the 1930s. They also raise sheep and lambs and sell their wool. Dan Getman and his wife Cheryl own Getman's Orchard and Vineyard. They grow raspberries, sweet cherries, tart cherries, Queen Anne cherries, Rainier cherries, apricots, peaches, pears, plums, apples, currants, and grapes. We are so excited to have these two very experienced orchardists share their knowledge with you. With that, here is Lise and Dan.
Good evening, everyone. Whitney, can you hear me okay? Good.
Yes, perfect.
Good. I'm Lise Rousseau, as Whitney introduced me, also known as the Cherry Lady. And we have had this orchard since 2004. The orchard's been certified organic since 2000. And when we arrived here in 2004, I knew nothing about growing cherries. I had been raised on a small farm, but had had no orchard experience. So had hit the ground running and am mostly self-taught. But now apparently I'm the go-to person when somebody wants information about organic orcharding. And I'm happy to be here tonight to share my knowledge and be with Dan for him to share his knowledge with all of you. Please do ask questions along the way if you have some, if you need some clarification on something, or if I've confused you. And here's Dan.
Hi, glad to see you all. Glad you showed up, and we're going to have some fun tonight. My wife and I got this orchard where we are now about 15 years ago. And when we came, we only had about 200 trees. And now we have about 750 trees, lots of vines, lots of grapes, lots of currants, lots of raspberries. And we've just been really having a lot of fun. And yeah, it's hard work. And there's times when the weather doesn't really behave the way I want it to. But the whole game is fun. I'm learning a lot, and there's nothing I'd rather be doing than, growing really good food. So I'm eager to get started with the program tonight. So Lise, you can take it from here.
Okay. Gretchen, can you give us the next slide? So we've done our introduction, and what we're hoping to cover this evening is the basics of pruning. This is not an in-depth seminar, so I'm just forewarning you that if you already know everything, this isn't the place for you. Well, actually, maybe it is, because I think I know a lot and I'm always learning something new. So we're going to cover the basics of pruning, some discussion of orchard management, some discussion of pest and disease management, and nutrition. And what we'd like to do right now is to have Gretchen put up a little poll for you to answer so that it gives us an idea of your level of knowledge, so we maybe can gear what we're doing. So if you could all do that quickly. And Gretchen, when you have a chance, can you put up the next slide? All right. Did you get that, Dan?
Yeah, I'm seeing it now.
Okay.
Great. We have 0 people that know what a tree is, though, Lise. I'm concerned.
I know yes. Well, at least nobody is claiming to want to teach this session. So I guess we're good.
That's good.
Dan and I wanted to share some thoughts with you before we start. And I'm not going to read this to you because I know we're all adults here. So if you could just briefly look over that, it kind of covers our philosophy of orcharding and how we approach knowledge and the work that we do. So I will make one addendum to this page that, yes, there's a great deal of intuition that goes into working with anything that's alive. But for me, I also like to really base my decisions on observation and science. So I'm hoping that we can all remember that science is very helpful for us to make the decisions that we need to make for our taking care of our living things. Gretchen, can we have the next slide? Oh. Actually, can you go back to the previous one? Someone apparently wasn't able to see. Okay, so I will read from go out there and do it. Spend time with your trees. They can tell you what they need. Learn their language. Every orchard is different. Every soil is different. Every sun exposure is different. Every microclimate is different. And every orchardist is different with their very own intuition and physical capabilities. Learn, discover, explore. You may find that over time that you are actually making an intimate relationship with your trees. Sounds funny, but it's not. Dive in and have fun. Okay, now we're ready. Thank you, Gretchen. So pruning. Every orchard needs to be pruned. And there are many reasons why people prune trees to be in the shape they are. Now, Dan and I decided that we weren't going to talk about tree pruning. What's the word I want, Dan? Systems. So there are lots and lots of different systems for how an orchard looks, from something called a tall spindle to things that are trellised, to orchards like mine, which is nice, 30, 40-year-old mature trees that are all spaced 20 feet apart and have their own structure. But there are some things that help you, guide you in the decisions that you make about how you want to prune your tree. So initially, you need to think about the size you want your tree, the shape you want your tree, and how you want your tree to look. And I'm going to kind of skip through my bullet points, but you need to give some thought about what you want out of your tree. So if you're just growing a fruit tree that you want to be really attractive and you don't care all that much about fruit, you might prune it slightly differently than if you're really trying to force a lot of fruit production. And a tree like a cherry tree, it said it requires 7 leaves for every cherry. So that's a lot of leaf load to support the tree. So you want to make sure that you're encouraging that tree every year to produce as much new wood as it can. And cherries, like many other fruits, and Dan, you can help me out with the ones that you grow. I grow cherries and apples. Cherries only produce on at least 2-year-old wood. So whatever you prune in a given year, that new wood that comes out, that may or may not produce cherries the second year, but it won't produce cherries the first year. And a lot of people are afraid when they first start getting into pruning of taking too much wood out because they think they're going to lose their fruit production. And that may be the case in that initial year. But pruning, I like to think of pruning as a 2-year process. So I'm pruning this year for what I'd like to see next year. All trees need an open canopy. So I like to think that a tree, I like to prune my trees so they look like a candelabra. Okay, so that there's a trunk coming up and all of these leaves or all of these branches that come off of that initial trunk, and it's all open in the middle because trees like light and they like air. And light and air are what keep them from getting more diseases than they already may get. When you prune a tree, I would venture to say, regardless of the variety of fruit tree, you want to make sure that you don't have more than 4, maybe 5 main branches that come off of that trunk. And then everything that comes off of those branches has to go out, not up, out. At a 45-degree angle is perfect. Too narrow, and it makes for a very weak crotch. And then that, if there's fruit load on that, the branch can come off. Too much, same thing. Too much weight on that branch, down it goes. Dan, do you want to add anything to that part at all?
You pretty much covered it. And just one other thing, when I'm pruning, I'm always looking for branches that are going into the middle. Mm-hmm. Like each branch is kind of its own little, has its own life, and it'll just grow as fast as it can in any direction it wants to. And when we get to the pruning stage the following year, I'm removing everything that's going towards the middle. I also watch for anything that's going down. Sometimes branches will, train themselves down with a heavy fruit load, and those branches will be aiming towards the ground. I make sure those are cut off and removed. Anything that goes in is cut off and removed, because I also like mine to go out. I want a yoga pose that's open and wide and receiving that light. Also, I don't want to be on tall ladders. I want to be able to get most of my fruit from the ground level. And so I'm aiming those branches out broad and wide more, and eliminating anything that's going straight up. Some of my trees are very precocious, meaning they just really want to grow. And you get all these little shooters, all these shoots. I call it dog hair because sometimes they're so thick. And all of those got to come off, just like Lise said.
Dan, I'm sorry.
Oh, there's a question. Can I ask you a question about the age of trees?
Sure.
The question is, do trees
Yes.
stop producing after the wood is a certain number of years old?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to jump in here, Lise. I have some trees that are probably 75 years old. Mm-hmm. And if they get the nutrition and the water and the care, they're gonna go a long time. I don't think they die of old age. They may die of getting beat up by the wind or if there's some kind of problem with a soil fungus or a bug or something like that. But I'm going to stick my neck out and say that, you know, they could last for a long, long time if they get what they need.
Yeah, I agree with that. We have apple trees here that were planted in, I think, like 1931. So they're 90 years old. They're still going strong. We have cherry trees that are from the 50s and 60s that are still going strong. I find that cherries in particular do get a little weak over time, and there seems to be more things in my orchard that are intent on bringing those trees down. Wind is a big problem. Bears are a big issue for us. And of course, the rats with hooves, deer, are all really hard on an orchard. But I agree with Dan that if you give these trees as much care as you possibly can, it's likely that, you know, a tree that I plant today will outlive me for a long time. And that's my goal.
I'll throw one little story in, Lise, just for fun.
Okay.
I bought the orchard next door about 7 years ago. And that orchard was an old cherry orchard. And then in 1989, all the cherry trees died because of weather conditions. It warmed up in January, then it froze hard, like 20 below for 2 weeks. The lake froze, and it was the sweet cherry disaster of 1989. So everybody had to replant. But in this new orchard that I bought, there was an open field, an open hillside, and it had nothing in it except for 2 cherry trees. And those 2 cherry trees were from that original batch of cherries, that original orchard. Those trees didn't get any nourishment. They didn't get any water unless it fell from the sky, and it got no pruning. They got nothing. And they survived. And now they're my babies. In fact, they hold a place of honor in that park, because that's where my vineyard is. And that main cherry tree, the grandmother of everybody, is right in the middle of the vineyard. So they're pretty hardy. That's an example of a tree hanging on and going through hard times and still being with us today.
Dan, can you talk a little bit about the 2 pictures that are on this page of
sure.
Your pear trees?
Yeah, those are pear trees. They're young. They've been in the ground for 4 years, I think. And the picture on the left is of this pear tree. It's a Belgian, a Flemish pear. And not the best picture. It's hard to get a picture of a tree with brown against brown, but you can kind of see that it's tall, spindly, the left-hand picture, and it's about 12 feet tall. And pears in particular, pears and plums have this habit of going straight up. It's narrow, it's not spreading out, they're going straight up. And you can see that in that left-hand picture. So me and my doggies got after that yesterday, and we brought it down to about 4 feet. You can see that there were numerous branches in the middle also that I kind of opened up. Sometimes I'll get a little stick of wood, like a 12-inch piece of wood, like a 1x2, and I'll make a crow's mouth on both ends of it and use it as a spreader to push those branches out so that they are reaching out to the sides more than going straight up. I've also used string or rope or vineyard tape to pull branches out. So on the right-hand side, you can see that it's about 4 feet tall, and I'm encouraging those lateral sideways branches.
Great. Christian, can you give us the next slide? So now more into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of actual pruning. The best time for pruning trees, most things I think in this environment, unless it's a flower plant that I don't know, is the fall and the winter. And the fall when the tree has gone dormant. So once the leaves, like this year, we had the trees went dormant, but none of the leaves fell off. So it was a real interesting experiment to try to prune with all that leaf on there, but the trees were dormant. So you do need to wait till they're completely asleep because you don't want any of that sap running through those branches and into those cuts. Now there are people who recommend summer pruning. It's not done around here very much. It's mostly done in Oregon and Washington. The problem with summer pruning is that the timing is very tight on from when you prune to when we go into dormancy. So you want to make sure that whatever growth is forced by that summer pruning, it has time to mature a little bit and harden off. And because that window is so short here, when we can have our first hard frost or a freeze, it's just not really done here. Now, how to prune. And there's a nice general chart on the right there that shows shaping and kind of things that you want to take out. And neither Dan and I are going to get into intensive information about pruning a particular tree. It's really something that needs to happen with the tree or a tree. And unfortunately, we don't have that available to us here. So try to take in as much as you can. There's some resources at the end and you can ask us questions, and we're both going to provide you with our email addresses if you have questions. But this chart gives a nice basic overview of what you should be looking at taking out. So if you're pruning a new tree, you put the tree in I'm sorry, now I'm going to contradict myself. The one time that you prune when the tree is not necessarily dormant is when you plant it. So most of us that have large orchards, when we get 50 trees to plant, they come as a whip. So there's just one long stick. We put it in the ground appropriately and cut it off about 3 feet high. And we cut it off about 3 feet high at a nice angle so that no water sits in there. Not too steep because then you just create a lot of dead wood. And about an inch above the first bud that you want to force out. And you want to look at it to see how many buds that you have available to you. And if you have a good tree supplier, they'll come with all the nice buds intact on that whip. And we didn't talk about planting at all in this, but when you plant, you want to make sure that you don't just dig a round hole with smooth sides. That will create a tree that will just grow around and around and around. In fact, I read an article last week that said it's better for you to plant a tree in a square hole. That the roots will go out and they'll hit that wall and they might turn, but then they hit another wall and they go through that wall. They tend not to do that circular thing. So don't plant your tree in a round hole. Or if you do, make sure you loosen that soil up on the sides quite a bit. Not sure where some of you are, but where Dan and I are, we deal with a lot of gravelly soils or rocky soils. There's people along the East Shore that, I mean, basically their soil is a rock this size with a little bit of dirt around it. Now they manage to grow trees is amazing to me because we have a little bit more silty soil here. We're on Finley Point, so we have glacial moraine.
I grow some of the best rocks.
You do, yeah. I mean, every year I think I've got them all, and there's some more. So they come up. I'm hitting them with the mower or whatever. So you want to, from one year to the next, cut out a lot of the wood from last year. And if it's not, unless you're trying to do some kind of refreshing of the tree. So we had a lot of old trees that had not been taken very good care of before we got here. And it took us about almost 5 years to get those trees where we were just doing a basic maintenance pruning from year to year, because we were cutting out a lot of wood. And when you cut out a lot of wood, you want to make sure that you never take more than a third of the tree away. It forces it to make, well, two things happen. You don't have enough canopy to support the root system because they support each other, and it will end up forcing out a lot of weak, crummy wood. So that rule of thirds. So one third the first year, a third the next year, and a third the following year. When you do take that, you can sometimes leave things that might look like a sucker, depending upon how much bud growth they have on them. If you are planning the following year to take out the piece of older wood that's next to it, and you want to leave that to be your new leader or a main branch. Again, when you prune, cut at an angle and about an inch from where the bud is that you want to grow. And I told Dan, we have folks that help us with the majority of pruning on our big trees, but we have 1,000 trees. So we do have quite a few dwarf trees, and I do the dwarf trees, and they are my babies, as Dan said, and I baby them because they were very poorly taken care of, and I am making decisions about every single branch. So I'm not just going in there with loppers. I go in with small pruning shears so that I can take out what I want. And I always cut a branch that has a bud that's going the way that I want to grow. So if I want things to grow that way, I'm looking for a bud that's over here. I would never prune to a bud that was on the inside, because then I just have to cut it off later. So I'm always looking at where I want the tree to go eventually. And there's also a way to do orchard refreshing that's called stubbing. So you might have a nice branch that comes out, but it's getting old and it's getting kind of tired, and maybe some portion of it doesn't bud anymore and doesn't produce fruit or leaves or anything. We have quite a few trees like that. And what you can do is you can look at that branch and say, oh, I see some buds here, like within a foot of where it comes off the trunk. I'm going to cut that branch off right here now and leave this stub so that I can hopefully force those buds to come off. That's done a fair amount in commercial orchards. Most people don't recommend that in a home environment because it's iffy. Sometimes it's better to just get rid of it. But for people like Dan and I want to try to maintain as much of that tree, those genetics, as I possibly can. So I want to help it out. There's one other thing that you can do with trees that's it probably has a name and I don't know what it is, but let's say you have a nice branch and you want to force a bud that's in the middle of that branch, but you're not ready to lose that whole branch yet. You can take a very sharp knife, go in about an inch above that bud, so above that bud meaning farther out along the branch, and put a slice through the bark and not all the way through, but maybe about 1/4 of an inch deep. And sometimes, not always, sometimes what that will do is it keeps the sap moving up to that bud, and then it doesn't really go past it, and it will force that bud to pop and come out. I'm trying to think if there was something else. Oh, I did want to briefly tell a story about our dwarf trees. We have a section of dwarf trees that was planted in 1995 and never watered. And they looked like they were maybe 2 years old when we came here in 2004. So we started to water them, and they weren't doing anything, and they weren't doing anything, and the production in that area was abysmal. And you still have to do the same amount of work, whether you take out a ton of cherries or 20 pounds. So I started babying these trees, and to the point where I would look at a branch and I wasn't ready to lose the whole branch, and I wasn't sure what was going to come out, because in cherries, as in many fruits, you can't tell what that bud is until it bursts. It just looks like a bud. It could be a piece of fruit, or it could be a leaf. And what I ended up doing on some of those is going to the end of that branch, looking at that cluster of buds, and taking out one, just to kind of force it to put the energy into the other ones to see what we might get. And we went from taking basically nothing out of that orchard to having a very nice harvest in there from year to year, if the weather gods cooperate. And that's the thing that's mostly the issue that we have to deal with here is weather. Dan, did you want to add anything else about pruning?
Oh, I think you got it covered. I think you did.
Okay.
I think you did.
Are there any questions right now?
There are several in
Okay,
the
shoot.
chat. So I'm going to combine these two. So the first one is from Valerie. It's, can you prune old plum trees in March? And the second one is from Samantha. We are taking over an orchard. Is it too late to prune it now? It was not done in the fall or winter yet.
I'm just going to jump in, Lisa. You can catch
Please
your
do.
breath for a minute. No, now's the time. Now is the time. You can prune right up to bloom time if you want. Sometimes people, if they have too many trees or don't get to it for some reason, will even prune after that. But it's good. It's good to get it before they bloom. And so now is a great time. Fall and winter doesn't really mean anything here. A lot of guys are just getting started. I'm just getting started. So now it's perfect time. Plums, cherries, apples, whatever you're pruning now, do it now.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily totally agree with Dan on the fall and winter pruning, but if you have an orchard, the buds aren't really fattened up right now. They're still relatively dormant. It's better to get it done, so you're not losing a year than to wait until the fall, because every year that you don't do it, it just becomes harder on the tree when you do.
Thank you. Our next question is from Lori, and Lori's question is it dangerous to prune in the winter?
No.
I don't think so.
No.
And I know a lot of folks who put on their snowshoes and get out there and prune. So if that's the question.
Only if you get caught in a really bad blizzard.
Yeah. It's definitely not dangerous for the trees.
Right.
You know, you want to always take care of yourself, because the trees will need you to be healthy. But other than that, it's not a problem in the orchard at all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. This is from Valerie. What do you do with trees coming out of the ground next to the older tree? Yeah.
Most tree fruits are grafted. So whatever is coming out of the ground is not what's above the ground. Now, I'm not going to say all of them, but most of them. I mean, if it was intentionally planted, it was likely grafted. So that stuff that coming is rootstock. Rootstock is not customarily used because of its pretty fruit. It's used because it's disease resistant or robust, or it supports that tree in a way that that tree's own rootstock wouldn't do as well. And some rootstocks force trees to dwarf based on, and I cannot tell you what that relationship is. Maybe Dan knows. Some rootstocks force a tree to produce more fruit. Some rootstocks are really good in rocky soils. Some rootstocks are really good in dry soils. Some rootstocks, Dan used the word precocious earlier, which is such a funny word for a tree fruit, but it is an actual technical word for trees that some rootstocks are in our environment are too precocious. So they create a tree that produces too much fruit for what this environment can adequately support with the amount of water and nutrients that we have available. I don't even remember what the question was anymore.
Well, it was about a branch coming up out of the ground.
Oh, out of the ground. Yeah, get rid of it.
Yeah, cut that baby off.
Good answer. This is from Steve. Should you prune apple trees every year?
Good idea. Yeah, if you want good fruit, prune them every year.
Wonderful.
Apple trees are biennial, so if you don't prune them every year, they will fall into a pattern where they just produce fruit every other year. So by pruning every year, you help that tree to produce fruit every year.
Thank you. This is from Ruth. How low is the lowest branch to keep?
Dan?
Oh, how low is the lowest branch that you should leave on the tree?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know. There's probably no big rules there, but I'd say it's nice to have at least 3 feet.
Yeah.
Of nice, solid, strong trunk, wood to help support those branches. If you start your fruiting branches lower, you kind of end up with a funny looking tree. I've got a few that do that, and I let them go a little bit like that. But it's nice to have the branches elevated, the fruit elevated. You're not bending over to pick so much. It's just better, maybe healthier for the tree and healthier for your back if you start at least 3 feet up.
Thank you. This one is from Catherine. I have 6-foot trees that were put in the ground last summer and they were not pruned. Can they be pruned like a new tree?
Well, new trees usually, like Lise said, are just kind of a stick or maybe a stick with 3 or 4 branches, and you just cut it off at 3 feet. Kind of depends on what it looks like right now. After the first year, I'm just imagining that there's probably a few branches. I probably would like to take a look at it before I decided, but yeah, you should prune it, but I wouldn't just stub it off at 3 feet. I don't think. What do you think, Lise?
Well, I know you can, but I personally wouldn't. So yeah. I'm not we're a commercial orchard, but I don't always act like it. And I'm one of those people that, buys the plant that looks like it's dying at the grocery store because I'm going to bring it back to life. So I hate to be too harsh with anything unless it's for its own good. If it's put out some nice structure, I would work with developing that structure rather than lopping it off. But if if that whip is 4 feet tall and everything is coming out of the top of that, that would be a hard one to not encourage it to start somewhat lower. But if there's no buds down there, you're going to kill it.
Mhm.
So there has to be buds down there for you to force to come out. If it's all bare wood up to where you've got tree, then you're kind of stuck with that.
I'm just going to throw in, if it's got some branches, encourage those branches, and you want them to go out more than straight up.
Yeah.
So encourage what you have after that first year. Every year counts for a lot here. It takes
Yeah.
the whole year to get back to where you started. So
Yeah.
Yeah, encourage those branches that you have, and see if you can make them go, more horizontal than vertical.
You guys are clearly spurring a lot of interest. I keep getting
Oh dear.
more questions. This one is relevant to what Dan was just saying. So this is from Patty. I have a plum and it is young and it produced this year. It has grown all the branches close together in the middle, starting at about 5 feet. What should I prune?
I'm going to say, again, same old story. Get it to go more left and right, and cut out the stuff that's going straight up. Now I can see that tree in my mind, and I know they're all going straight up. I'm going to see how creative you are and see if you can find a 12-inch stick, like maybe 4 of them, and make a crow's mouth or a little V in the end of those sticks, and see if you can push those branches out. You can prop one side, one end of the stick to another branch, so that these vertical branches are going like that. Do that 3 or 4 times if you can, and gradually that tree, by the end of the season, that tree will be aiming branches those directions. Okay, so after those trees are kind of pushed out, cut off the branches that are going in and encourage the branches that are going out. I would cut off the ones that are going straight up, and bring them down half of what they are, and you're going out, 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 not in, not down.
And if you have multiple, I don't know how many branches you have, but if you've got more than 4 or 5, this might be a good time to pick the ones to get rid of, because you don't want too many, or you can't get enough air and light on the inside of that tree.
I agree.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
In the interest of hearing the rest of your presentation, I'm going to hold off on the rest of these questions, but so everyone knows they're still here. We still see them. I just want to hear the rest, and we'll come back to whatever we haven't answered later on.
Good.
Okay.
So keep asking, keep typing. We see all of them.
Okay. Gretchen, can you give us the next slide? So orchard management, and I'm going to, what the things I'm going to recommend here are do as I say, not as I do. So what is under your trees is very important, and all of the grass, any vegetation that is under your tree, basically from the trunk to about a foot from the edge of the drip line. So do you think everybody knows what the drip line is? The drip line on a tree is the outer perimeter of it. So it's, if you think of it as the rain falls on the tree, that the majority of that rain is going to fall on the outside. That's the drip line. The drip line also pretty much represents where the majority of the roots are that are gathering nutrients. So if you think about every place where those roots are around that perimeter of the tree, if you have something growing on top, particularly grass, that grass competes for those nutrients with those roots. So ideally, you'd want to have not bare soil. I'm not a big fan of bare soil, but some kind of mulching that goes on so that that soil is kept moist, but bare. And so that those nutrients are getting from the mulching is getting worked back into the soil. Our orchard, unfortunately, has grass right up to the trunks. And we just have not over the years been able to get rid of it in amongst 1,000 trees. And I was telling Dan the other day, we do have sheep, so we have sheep waste hay. And I spent a good part of a month putting out mulch of all that beautiful waste hay with all that wonderful sheep poop and urine in it, that lots of nutrition, putting it out all along in our apple orchard and in one area of our dwarf trees, along our irrigation lines, because I thought that's great, keeps that clean, putting out nutrition. And we also share our property with a really robust flock of turkeys. So the turkeys came along and spread all of that everywhere. So I did in fact help fertilize our orchard, and you can tell where it ended up from one year to the next. But my efforts to do mulching are thwarted. Now you can use lots of things for mulching. You can use mowing, you can leaves, you can use orchard prunings, you can use wood chips, you can use cardboard. So there's lots of things that are available for you to mulch, but if you can, if you have the wherewithal and are not dealing with too many trees, please mulch. And this is probably not a group that I would have to tell to not use Roundup. Any of those particular weed killers are terrible for orchards. They're terrible for the soil, and unfortunately, people are not all of that careful about keeping it off their trees. So we see people that have damaged trees from Roundup. There are a couple products that you can use to knock back grass and weeds around a tree, and one of those is agricultural vinegar, and some other things. We use agricultural vinegar here and have had pretty good success with it if we use it at the appropriate time, which is when the grass is all sweet and new. I would say, and Dan, you can tell me how you feel about this, that as much as possible, you should leave your leaves and your prunings, if they're small enough, or if you've been able to chop them up, or you don't have little kids running around on them, out in the orchard. We used to clean up our orchard of all of the prunings and put it in a big pile and burn it. And now, sorry, excuse me. Now we put all of those prunings in the center of our alleyways, and there's a gentleman that lives near us that has an orchard flail, and he comes along with this thing and it chops all of those up and they lay on the ground and they are gone in a year. It's amazing. And all of that, so we're keeping all of those nutrients in the orchard. There are concerns about when you do that, if you have disease trees, that you may be keeping that disease in the orchard. We haven't found that to be the case.
I'm just going to chime in for a second, Lise.
Yes, please do.
First, can you do me a favor and not say turkey?
Turkey.
My dogs
Oh,
go
sorry.
nuts when they hear that word. They love turkey. So mum's the word on that one.
All right.
But yeah, save your, mow in towards your tree. They love the organic matter. It thrives. It makes the soil happy. The little critters in the soil are singing when they get another load of grass. We do the same thing with the flail. And I have a neighbor with a flail, and we windrow our prunings. And that thing is amazing. It'll even chop up something 2-3 inches in diameter if I have it out there. Usually the bigger stuff I'll save for firewood or for people that like to smoke meats. But the little stuff, and there's lots of it, will get all chopped up. It's amazing what that machine will do. And that shredded wood is great for mulching. I also really, really like Pico peat. It comes from Big Arm, right across the lake on the west side of the lake. In Big Arm, Montana. And I get that by the semi-load. It's wonderful stuff. It's black. It actually has nutrients in it, and it keeps the moisture in. It hangs on to nutrients, and it's wonderful, wonderful stuff.
And it smells good too.
All I have to say about that.
One thing that you might want to encourage not under your trees, but around your trees is anything that is nitrogen fixing. So any of the legumes like clovers or vetch, those are very, very compatible in an orchard. Do you want to go to the next slide, Gretchen? We have a little bit more on orchard management. Okay, now we're at, I'm sorry, did you want to have a question for us?
Just a quick one. Do you have a preferred source on agricultural vinegar?
Well, this is not a sales pitch. I sell it, but we get it from Fleischmann's, the yeast people, and we get it by the barrel full, and actually go pick it up over in Spokane. So by doing that, it can be rather pricey if you just go to your local garden center, but they will sell it to you by the barrel from Fleischmann's, and it's a 20% acidity, so it's quite strong. You want to make sure you don't get it on you, and you want to make sure you do it on a day where you're not breathing it in. It will hurt you, and it kills everything that it touches or damages everything that it touches. But it's not persistent in the soil. It doesn't really go into the soil. We totally eliminated our Canada thistle issue on our property by applying that. So it does work.
Yep. I even put a mask on when I'm using it.
There you go.
Yeah, I don't want to breathe that stuff in. And then we add a little orange oil to it. You want to talk about that?
There you can use orange oil, or we have I think it's actually a paraffin-based adjuvant that's approved for use in organics that we use as a spreader sticker, and it increases its efficacy by about 50%. So it's worth it to add a little something to it to break up that surface tension, especially on grasses, because grasses have all those wonderful little hairs that make all the water beat up on the grass. And basically vinegar is water. And it makes it so that it actually makes the whole blade of grass wet rather than just on the hairs where it evaporates off.
That stuff will burn your skin too, so you don't want that. Yeah.
Any other questions right now?
Not
Okay.
now.
Dan, did you want to talk about fruit thinning? And I'll just start you off by saying I don't thin cherries, okay? But after that, there's plenty of fruit that might benefit from being thinned.
I don't thin cherries either, but just about everything else I will thin. I just get tons of blossoms on my apples, on my peaches. Peaches will just go crazy making blossoms. And it seems like every darn one of them will actually get fertilized, get pollinated, and create a little peach. Peaches are heavy. Peach wood is brittle, and when they get big and they get full of juice, they will break your branches. So I take off probably 75% of my peaches go to the ground when they are about the size of an almond, or when they're the size of a Brazil nut or a walnut. That's better analogy. And apples too. I'm just loaded up with apples. Sometimes there's 5, 6, or 7 apples right together in a bundle like that, and I'll get it down to 2 apples, sometimes 3 if they're really big. I don't want any energy from my apple trees to go into runty apples or deformed apples, or, you know, if they're not perfect and big and vital and strong and dying to get to adulthood, then they're going to the ground. I do have some schools. I sell a lot of apples to schools that deliberately want a smaller apple. So I'll leave some trees a little heavier laden with apples to produce small apples. But I'll get each little cluster of apples down to about 2, sometimes 3. Same thing with plums. If I let all of my plums just hang on the tree, I'm just going to get little, almost inedible, sour little plums. So I'm pulling lots of plums off. Same thing with pears. If I don't thin them, they're small, and the bigger ones are better and sweeter and more fun to pick and easier to sell. Grapes too. I guess we're talking about trees mostly, so I'll leave the grapes alone unless somebody else has a specific question. But thinning is real important on my orchard.
Okay. Does anybody have a question about thinning before we talk about water a little bit? No. Okay. So as I wrote here, water, water, water in the summer. Most years we don't get enough water from the sky in the summer to support a fruit tree with fruit on it. And the tree has to decide whether it's going to put its energy into the fruit, or if it's going to put its energy into the leaves, or just surviving. And so you want to help it out as much as possible. Now, I'm not sure where most of you are, but where Dan and I are, we have particular soils that we have to be less water more often than a lot of deep water. Our soils drain really, really well here. So, and that's for 2 reasons, the less more frequently. One, you don't want to waste water. So if you put it in and it's just all draining away, that there's no point in that. And 2, you don't want to wash your nutrients away. So you don't want to put on more than is watering down into the root zone, which is usually between 12 and 18 inches is where you want the majority of your moisture. Again, with that drip line thing, you want to try to keep the majority of your water into the drip line if you can. If you can't, it's not crucial. I mean, it's not like you're going to do something wrong. This picture that you see here is not my orchard, but that's kind of how we are set up. So our water goes everywhere, and we do use sprinklers like that. We use a micro spray system in our orchard so that there's a more even distribution of the water rather than a drip. In these soils here, drip is not advised because the water hits the ground and makes a column of moisture that goes straight down rather than spreads out. If you have more clay in your soil, that might be different depending upon where you are. But in well-drained soils, it's better to use a sprinkler system than a drip system. Now, Dan asked to have this in here that depending upon who you are harvesting for, and this is true for us too, you may want to cut back on your water as you're going into harvest, like that last week. Would you say as long as 10 days, Dan?
Yeah, sometimes 2 weeks, depending on, what's coming out of the sky.
Okay.
But if on peaches, on apricots, on cherries, and plums, I cut way back. Grapes, of course, you don't want any water. A lot of people never even water their grapes around here. But and cherries, the last week, sometimes 10 days, we don't water cherries, just to help the sugars not get watered down, not to dilute the sugars.
Yeah, and for us, we do water our cherries right up to harvest, depending upon where they go. So a portion of our harvest every year goes to an organic winery in Missoula, and they want those cherries water starved. The bigger portion of our harvest goes to our value-added product lines that we make. And those cherries get pitted and frozen, and I want those as full of water as possible because it makes it a much more efficient pitting process. And I'm not losing, I don't lose the same quantity of juice, and I think that seems counterintuitive, but there you go. The one caveat about watering is the minute you get that fruit off the tree, you gotta water that tree. And especially if you've been withholding water, maybe even a little bit heavier than before up to harvest, because if you think of each one of those pieces of fruit as a little reservoir of moisture, and it's hot, and the tree during the day kind of goes into a little bit of a dormancy. The tree kind of shuts down during the day, especially when it's hot, and at night it goes to that fruit and pulls moisture out of it to support the tree. And you've harvested everything now, and it's still hot, and the tree doesn't have that fruit anymore to go to for moisture. So you got to support the tree by giving it a good amount of water.
Yep.
I would imagine it's true for fuzzy fruits. It's definitely true for cherries that you want to keep the water off the fruit. And for the most part, if you can, keep it off the leaves too.
I'm going to call them fuzzy fruits from now on.
Well,
and here are my
fuzzy fruits. Cherries are apples. It's not that big of a deal, but cherries are very hygroscopic. You get water on a cherry and it just soaks all that water in, and you will it will cause those cherries to crack. So you want to make sure that you keep the water off the fruit.
Yep.
If you are interested in growing cherries, the other thing about the size of your trees and how many you have is that we frequently have rain events right around harvest time, and the riper those fruits are, the more likely they are to crack from a rain event, because the top of the cherry near the abscission area where the stem comes down is a little well, and it will rain, and 3 or 4 raindrops will get in there and that cherry will soak it up. And so if your trees are small enough, you can go out there afterwards and shake the heck out of them and try to get as much of that moisture off as you can. I've done it. And the big orchards around here will often hire a helicopter to come in and actually blow their trees off. I don't know how effective that is, but makes them feel better. So there's that. Do we have any questions right now about watering or orchard management? We do? Okay.
We have tons of questions.
Oh dear.
In terms of water, do you water from the trunk out to the drip line or just at the drip line?
Dan, do you want to answer that? I have an answer, but yours might be different.
Yeah. I water everything. I water from wall to wall,
Yeah.
from corner to corner. The entire soil profile of my orchard is watered, is saturated with water.
Yeah.
So sometimes that's not practical for a homeowner. I would repeat what Lise just said about not getting water on the leaves or on the fruit. You want to water low. So I'm thinking about homeowners that maybe just have a sprinkler or something like that. Figure out how you can do it so that you're not spreading water like a sprinkler. And I to get to your question, I think you're asking, do you water by the trunk of the tree where it meets the ground? It doesn't really matter a whole lot, but those feeder roots that Lise was talking about, that first 18 inches of soil where those feeder roots are, where those capillaries are, you want to get those wet. And that can be 10 to 15 feet, all the way around that tree. But certainly within 5 to 6 feet from the base of that tree would be a good idea. So anywhere between 6 and 15 feet from the base of the tree, saturate it as best you can.
If you think of a tree, a good way to think of a tree is what you see on the canopy is mirrored under the soil. So there's a similar structure that's under the soil about the same size as what you see above the soil. And the majority of those things that are taking nutrients, so some of those are just support structures, keep it in the ground, and some of those things are for feeding and water. And those tend not to be right up against the tree. They tend to be out, as Dan said. So if you can't keep it off the trunk, it's not like it's the end of the world. You have to work with what you got. And the reason that orchardists just water everything is because, frankly, there's not a better way to do it really at this point. I think. So
I've dug a lot of trenches around trees and right through orchards doing irrigation lines. I'm always stunned at where I'm finding those tree roots, sometimes a long ways from where the tree is.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the root system is definitely at least as big, sometimes twice as big as what you're seeing on top of the ground. And so get that water out there. Makes all the difference in the world.
Great. And I know you all have at least one more slide about pests. Let's jump to that before we do any more questions.
Okay. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on any of this, and Dan, I'll leave that up to you if you do. There are many things that want to damage our trees and our fruit. Here, not as much as other places, so we're kind of fortunate in that. And for cherries, for example, we have the Western cherry fruit fly. And if you are growing cherries in this area, I urge you most strongly to control for the Western cherry fruit fly. You may not care that you have a worm in your cherry, but wormy cherries can shut down the entire cherry industry. Every load of cherries that leave this area are tested, and individual orchards are tested. And if those larvae are found in the fruit, it will shut that orchard down, possibly the entire harvest.
Mhm.
So please be responsible with your cherry trees and control for the Western cherry fruit fly. There are some organic control methods that are pretty efficacious. I'm not going to get into a list of chemicals here, and they are chemicals, even though they're organic. But I will happily answer emails about things like that afterwards, because we would just get into the weeds on what to use. There's also another fruit fly here now called the, yes, it is. It's on that red fruit. That's a Western cherry fruit fly. It's called a Drosophila fruit fly. They're evil little vixens. They've got red eyes. I don't have a picture of one here. They're smaller than the Western cherry fruit fly. They are much more, oh, what's the word I want? They are very aggressive about laying eggs. Let's put it that way. They need to, they are killed or controlled by the same chemical, but not in the same way. So you have to use different things or different applications for them. And unlike the Western cherry fruit fly, which lays an egg in a cherry, they will lay multiple eggs in a cherry, and they're active much longer and younger. So they come out of the ground basically ready to mate, where the Western cherry fruit fly is, you usually have a 7-day window from when they've emerged from the ground and start putting their oviposters in cherries.
Yeah,
We,
they date for at least a week.
yeah.
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 Yeah, before the hunt, when they have a 1-week dating period. Yeah.
1-week dating period. We also, there's a picture on the lower right there of leaves with some horrible thing looking on the top of it. That is what black cherry aphids do. They are more of a, they don't really do anything to the fruit unless their honeydew gets on your fruit. They're really nasty because they have something in their saliva when they are eating sap that causes the leaves to curl up, so it protects them inside this little leaf thing. And they're, like all aphids, they can reproduce asexually, so they don't even need to have boy aphids around. They're kind of hard on trees. They won't kill your tree, but they do stress trees. So if you can, it's something that insecticidal soap works really well on. Upper right, and then leaf hoppers are more of a disease vector, so they move stuff around, like the little cherry disease and cherry X disease, and even some of the cankers. And oh shoot, it just went out of my head. Pseudomonas. Insecticidal soap.
Mhm.
So anything that you, I'm sorry, I saw a question there. So anything that you would use for, like in your vegetable garden, safer soap, there's a, like a spray, it's a potassium-based soap, will knock them back if you catch them early.
This sounds silly, but it's something I've been doing for 15 years. There's about 1 week in my observations where the aphids will show up. Sometimes they don't show up at all.
Yeah.
But there's about 1 week when I see little spots where they'll go, and I'll walk up and down the orchard, and I'll have a pruner in my hands, in my back pocket. And usually they just like the tender leaves at the very end. So I'll climb up or bend the branch down and just snip it. And I'll have a garbage bag, a large bag with me, or throw it in the trailer and just stuff them in that bag, climb up, and it doesn't really take that long for the number of trees that I have. It'll kill a couple of afternoons probably, but it's I feel better about doing that than spraying malathion or anything like that a commercial place would use normally. That soap is good.
Yeah. Um, apples, of course, we have our codling moths there in the upper right-hand corner on the green. Leaf rollers, tent caterpillars, and green apple aphids. We are almost never get aphids on our apples here. We have much less codling moth pressure now that our sheep are mostly in the apples, so they eat stuff that hits the ground and eat codling moth larvae. And I'm gonna speak in support of the tent caterpillars. They don't do anything, okay?
Yeah.
They don't hurt your tree. They make sticky mess of their webbing, but they don't. They might eat some leaves, but they're really not something to spend any time on killing, unless they're I don't know, unless you just can't tolerate them. But they do not do anything. They don't damage your tree, and I am advocating for leaving the tent caterpillars alone.
I'll just chime in again. And anything I can do with my hands that don't involve the chemical or a spray, I'll do. And so again, with tent caterpillars, if I don't want to look at them, or somebody in my family's getting squeamish about them, I'll just go snip them and snip the branch, put it in a bag, throw it in the truck, take it to the dump. And one other thing I'll say about codling moths, I've had great luck in the last few years using sticky traps. And I ordered up a couple of big boxes, and they have these little plastic balls, and I put this sticky stuff on them, and they have a nice hanger, and I'll put those, in every tree. And you'd be surprised how many codling moths I get with that. And it's really helped a great deal.
Yeah. And some of the things it's hard for us to give advice on, because, if you're treating 2 or 3 trees where you live, you will do very different things than what Dan and I might do. I mean, we use some mating disruption with the codling moths, but unless you have 2 acres or more of trees, it doesn't work. I mean, it's not that it's too expensive, it just doesn't work. So so we're trying to give the best advice we can, basically, for people who have a few trees that they're trying to take care of. Apples get scab, mildew, rust. I've not seen fire blight. I don't know if Dan, if you've seen fire blight here.
No, never.
Scab, a lot of what scab, it's tough. There's years where scab's really bad, and there's years where it's not so bad. You can put some things on your trees to try to control it, but the timing is really funky. I would work on getting scab resistant varieties to plant before I would work on trying to control scab with something.
I'm going to throw in one thing about peaches.
Yes, please.
I don't know of any bugs that bother my peaches.
Oh,
but
nice.
Peach leaf curl is a real bugger around here. And that's a fungus that'll come in June. And a lot of times in June, it's cool at night and wet. And that's when the peach leaf curl comes in, and it doesn't very often kill a tree, but it looks really ugly for a long time, and it does set it back. The best thing to do for peaches to stop that peach leaf curl is copper. And there's a few different kinds of copper sulfate, copper aluminate, things like that. And it's best applied in the fall, maybe 2 different applications, but I also do it in the spring. So a nice warm day when it's not raining, get some copper on your peach trees if you have some. If you have any questions about that, feel free to email me and we'll talk more detail about it.
Yeah. And any pest control questions that you want to ask me, Dan's not certified organic, but he basically manages his farm as if it were organic.
Yeah.
We are, and so we've got the paperwork. And I will happily give anybody advice on what they might want to use to control things. And I just really don't want to get into it here because it, like I said, would just be in the weeds on questions that, yeah. So unless there's a specific question on this, let's go to the next slide. Okay. Nutrition.
The dogs ate. Oh,
Can
screen.
I ask, because I'm like, you know, bright, shiny things, can I ask if you guys have questions that you put them into the Q&A so that Whitney can manage them, and not into the chat because I get really easily distracted.
And we will not have time to answer all of these questions, but we will compile a list. We'll send them to our presenters, and if they're willing to answer them, we'll send them back out to everyone, just so you all know.
Sounds like a plan.
I lost your voice. Can you hear me?
We can hear Dan, but we can't
Oh,
hear Lise.
Okay, now I got you. I got you back. Are you talking, Whitney?
I'm not talking. No, I wasn't
Oh.
sure if you had more to share on nutrition, and then we're going to wrap up because it's just about 7:30.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
Lise, we can't hear you right now. I don't know if your microphone's not working.
Can you hear me now?
I got you now.
Oh, okay. I must have bumped something. All trees need feed, and like any plant, they need, you know, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and calcium. And then what I consider the micros, which is the magnesium, iron, copper, boron, and manganese. Trees like cherries, not having enough boron, for example, can shut down a blossom because the trees need boron to produce blossoms. So what do you do about that? Well, you can be like some people around here and just pour it all on every year, whether you need it or not. And I don't recommend that. So I think if you're going to have trees, that the responsible thing to do is to do foliar and or soil testing every 3 to 5 years so that you have a good sense of what your trees really need and just put on what they need and not something that the chemical guy down at the store sells you. It's not very expensive, and is there any testing in Montana now? We send our stuff out to Indiana for testing.
In Ronan, there's Westland Seed.
Westland will do testing?
Yeah, they don't do it right there. They send it out.
They send it out.
But yeah, they're good at it, and that's where I usually go.
Okay. If you want to do this, let me know, and by the email address, and I will happily put in a couple links. Okay, guys, can you please put your questions in the Q&A? I will happily forward the links to the testing sites that I'm familiar with. But basically, you know, watch your trees. Do your trees look healthy? Are the leaves nice and green and big and robust? If not, then that's a good time to start exploring what's going on. We feed our trees almost exclusively foliarly. So I put food in my big orchard sprayer, and I drive around with fish emulsion and kelp and calcium and whatever else is necessary at the time. And it's actually pretty important to try to get some nutrients on those trees before bud breaks so that you can support the tree in that blossoming and initial fruit set process. And for me, one of the most important things to put on is calcium. for cherries because calcium helps fruit trees build really strong cell walls, especially in the fruit. And so it keeps things from cracking and splitting. And it's just it's a good an all around good nutrient. If you're not doing testing, I wouldn't put micronutrients on more than once a year because too much is just as bad as not enough. Maybe sometimes worse because you throw things so far out of balance. Most commercial orchards around here put on some kind of fall application of nitrogen. We put on a big dose of fish emulsion. The neighbors love that. And but it does help give the trees a leg up in the springtime.
Yeah.
And like I said, you might consider putting your nutrients on through the leaves, and you can get some relatively inexpensive, nice little backpack sprayers that do they're called mist sprayers that can help you do that.
Hey, Lise, do you ever use any seaweed products?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yeah, kelp.
Yep.
Kelp and
And
fish. So it's just like being at the ocean here.
Yep.
It smells right. You look out at the water and it's all good.
And you buy that in big bags, like fish meal, kelp meal?
I use a liquid fish and kelp. I go down to, there's a guy that's an organic potato grower in Manhattan, and I go
Yep.
pick that stuff up by the barrel full. So
Cool.
yes.
Cool. I get dry stuff, dried kelp powder and dried fish meal powder. And also crab meal is available now.
Yeah.
It's expensive and it's always a little painful to buy, but I see great results with it. And so I'm farming and I'm feeding the soil and keep those little critters happy and well fed. And I know they'll take care of my trees as well.
Yeah, and that's it sounds like a throwaway line, but I've said since the beginning that my goal here is to grow really good soil, and we'd happen to get cherries off of it. But if I'm not taking care of the soil, you got to take care of the soil first.
Yep.
Everything else kind of takes care of itself after that, including all that disease and pest.
Yep.
All of those things are much significantly less if you've got really healthy trees.
Yep.
So I'm looking at the time here. Are you guys ready to start wrapping it up for us?
I'm done unless you have questions, except for this fabulous list of resources. And the WSU, Washington State University Tree Fruit Program is fantastic. It's everything that Dan and I have said here on steroids. Basically, any question you want answered is there. They've got fantastic graphics, all kinds of minutia as far down as you want to go.
Great resource.
It's a great resource. So any of these, you can just go to the, treefruit.wsu.edu and start there, or you can go to these various sublinks that they have, but they do fantastic research. They're the nicest people. And yeah, I wish we had them here, but I understand why we don't. Most of our ag money does not come from cherries in the state of Montana. So, the research follows the money.
That's right.
And you'll see my email address at the bottom there, info@fatrobinorchard.com, and Dan's, Dan Getman at iCloud.com. And both of us are happy to answer any questions that you might have. Hey,
Lise.
Yes, sir.
You were brilliant tonight. Thanks for letting me tag along. And
I appreciate the help.
Whitney, you run a tight ship.
Yes.
You did it right. Thanks for getting us set up. Isa Lund, Gretchen, thank you so much. And everybody that showed up, have some fun. And feel free to contact us. Yeah. Get out there, get your hands in it. We're going to get some warm weather. You can sniff your soil, and if it smells great, tell it thanks, and give it some good nutrients, and talk to your trees. They'll talk back to you.
I have one other quick thing to share with you. When you are pruning, if you think you have any disease in your trees and you're going from one tree to another, you should sterilize your tools from one tree to the next. And the easiest way to do that is with some Everclear in a spray bottle. So just take your tool, spritz it with some Everclear, and be on your way. That pretty much takes care of anything that might be on those tools and will help you from spreading disease. I forgot to put that in here.
So you do one squirt on the pruner and one squirt in the mouth every time?
Yeah, it
Okay.
helps. It helps a lot.
Well, thank you both so much. I think I speak for everyone in saying that this was incredibly informative and really fun. This is the most questions I've ever seen in one of our webinars, and that tells me that people are really hungry for this information. So one more time, we'll be sending out the link to this video, so you'll have this recording, and we'll send these questions that didn't get answered to our amazing presenters, and we'll share them with everyone. So thank you so much. This was really informative and wonderful. And
Thank you,
all
Whitney.
for taking
Thank
part
you.
in Free the Seeds. Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you. Have a nice night, guys.
Yep. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Good night.